Okay, so hi everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for our consultation webinar, where we will be discussing the principles and methodologies that will be used to update the supply data verification section in the Batteries and ITTAV supply data verification procedures. My name is Michelle Hoover, and I am one of the communication advisors at RPRA, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. My colleagues, Ryan McAfee, who is our compliance manager of inspections, and Jonathan Peng, who is our senior registry and compliance officer, will be hosting today's webinar and will introduce themselves in just a moment. So we will be answering questions throughout the webinar today, and we have slides that have prompting questions. And we ask that you please tailor your questions or answers to the items that we're specifically looking for feedback on during the consultation. If you have questions that aren't directly related to the content we are reviewing today, you can always reach out to our compliance and registry team, and their email is registry@rpra.ca. So a few housekeeping items to help you understand Zoom. So if you have questions, you can click on the Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your screen and type in your question and click send. There's also an upvote feature that allows you to bump up someone else's question to the top of our queue. And this can be valuable if you wanted to ask the same question or if you are interested in hearing that answer. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please let me know by using the chat function, and I will do my best to support you. If we are running short on time and can't get to all the questions today, we will be following up afterwards. So someone from our compliance team will follow up with you. And this webinar is being recorded and uploaded this afternoon to our consultation webpage, as well as the slides that we're reviewing today, so you can review them yourself. So the first item we're going to review today is our agenda. So today we're going to be reviewing the purpose of this consultation, why we're all here, including the principles and objectives of the procedures, as well as the timeline we are following for updating them. We will then provide some background context on the procedures for you, and then we'll dive into the topics that we are actually consulting on, which are the qualifications of a verifier, the universal or material-specific procedure options that we are proposing, and then the proposed approaches to the procedures and sampling methodology. And then finally, we will provide a summary of the webinar as well as next steps. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ryan from our team.
Okay. Well, it would not be a webinar without some technical difficulties, but here I am. Good morning, everyone. Michelle, thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, my name is Ryan McAfee. I am RPRA's new inspections manager. And looking at the participation list today, there are some familiar names on the list, including at least one person who was supposed to be on vacation and yet joined us anyway, which I'm grateful for. So thank you for that, as well as new connections. So welcome everyone to today's consultation. Since I'm new to the organization, let me just start by saying that from my job title, you'd be correct to think that my day-to-day roles have focused on inspections and investigations. But today I get to put on a different but complementary hat. I'm keenly interested in today's topic as a person with experience in research methods, compliance verification, and program improvements. So with that, let's jump right in. Next slide, please. So purpose of the consultation. So first of all, with a view to updating the supply data verification procedures for batteries, as well as information technology, telecommunications, and audiovisual equipment, or ITTAV, we'll be reviewing the supply verification requirements in both the batteries, as well as the electrical and electronic equipment regulations. That's a mouthful, so from here on in, I'm just going to say E for short when referring to that second regulation. Specifically today, we're engaging with you to begin, this is our first step, we're beginning our consultation on methodologies and principles concerning what is a qualified person or a verifier that we should be considering, the universality of procedures, producer categories, and as was mentioned already, our sampling methodology, which will be towards the end of today's consultation meeting. And of course, as Michelle mentioned, we'll advise you before wrapping today how you can participate fully in our next steps. Now, before we move on to the next slide, this is probably a good time to mention why we've decided to combine batteries and e-regulation consultations today. Fairly simple. First of all, I would say that these two regulations are very similar when it comes to requirements concerning reporting and calculating management obligations, but also in our work, and as consumers would know as well, we've observed that batteries and electronics are often supplied together by producers. So a combined approach may be more efficacious than disparate practices, and we'll go into these in a moment. So Michelle, next slide, please. In developing procedures, it's always helpful to be clear about the, I'd say, overarching principles and objectives informing these policy improvements or procedural improvements here at the authority. Top of mind is promoting the accuracy and completeness of data submitted to the authority. This is for several reasons, including, not the least of which, making sure producers are aware of what's expected of them in terms of upcoming management requirements, as well as providing clear guidance to producers to support consistent data verification. And as always, RIPRA has a view to cost effectiveness, efficiency of procedures, and ensuring a level playing field, which is one of the most important tasks of a modern regulator. Michelle, next slide, please. So in terms of our timeline, well, here we are on September 9th, the first webinar. Over the next month, consider what you've heard today, and if you wish, provide feedback, agree, better yet, disagree with us. You're welcome to propose different solutions. All submissions made before October 9th will be considered. And I emphasize disagree because this really is a consultation and we would very much appreciate your feedback. This is a good time maybe to emphasize that this consultation for us at RIPRA is not a procedural check in a box. I should say though that I believe that what you'll see later in the presentation really hits the mark, but through this consultation process, we're open to new ideas and different approaches. Now, during the week of November 15th, we'll be posting a draft procedure. So that's after we've had time to receive and consider your feedback on the RIPRA website in anticipation of our next consultation webinar together at the end of November. Now, following the second webinar, you'll have an additional period to submit feedback before the final draft is posted in February. Now, to reiterate a point that Michelle made, in today's consultation, we intend today to be fairly high level as we start to narrow down with a focus on principles and methodologies. But if you have any case-specific questions or you'd like to discuss how these regulations impact your business directly, I would encourage you to contact our highly skilled compliance team. So with that, why don't we pause for our first set of questions? Next slide, please. And I believe for questions, my colleague Jonathan, who will be stick handling the second half of the presentation, will be, here you are, Jonathan, fabulous. Okay, any questions for us? And to read the slide, do you have questions about the purpose of the consultation today, objectives and principles of the supply data verification process, or timelines for updating the procedures? All right. In that case, why don't we move on to the next slide? And let's get right into supply data reporting requirements. Now, for many of you on the call today, you'll be aware of these requirements already, but I'll briefly summarize a few concepts for the purpose of facilitating today's consultation. So under both the batteries and the E regulation, producers are required to report new supply data information every year to establish their management requirements for the following year. If supply information is incorrect, that means that producers are at risk of failing to manage sufficient materials and falling out of compliance. As of next year, producers will need to submit a verification report to verify the supply data being reported to the authority. This is important because producers will need to work with a qualified person or a verifier to complete the verification report. More on that, quite a bit of detail on that point later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, scope and application. So I'd like to highlight a few items here. So starting next year, verifications will be required for battery supply data, including the weight of single-use batteries supplied in 2021, the weight of rechargeable batteries supplied in 2020, as well as the weight of any post-consumer recycled content contained in either rechargeable or single-use batteries. And of course, moving on to 2022 E supply data reports, the weight of ITTAV supplied in 2020, and if applicable, management reductions concerning any post-consumer recycled content, warranties, and repair options. Now, our team has indicated a couple of speaking points here that I would be remiss if I skipped. So keep in mind, even in the absence of verification reports, producers are obliged to provide complete and accurate information to RIPRA. And should an inspection be initiated, an inspector may analyze additional data or ask you questions about how you arrived at your 2020 to 2021 supply values. Next slide, please. Now, methods for determining supply data. At the authority, we understand the challenges faced by producers who don't ordinarily track Ontario supply data separately from other supply data. So producers can choose from the following methodologies. Now, to determine the weight of batteries or ITTAV supplied, producers can report the actual weight, of course, or the calculated weight using weight conversion factors. To determine the number of units of batteries or ITTAV supplied, you're welcome to report the actual number, certainly, as well as another option would be the calculated units, referencing the percentage of Ontario's population to determine the Ontario portion of these units. Now, we felt it was important to mention this information today, although we're seeking feedback on other content. But if you'd like to learn more about these concepts for a detailed explanation, you're welcome to refer to Appendix A of the audit and verification procedure on our website. Next slide, please. List of acceptable verifiers. So we're now changing gears to discuss who can undertake data verifications. And after these slides, we'll have our next Q&A segment. So hold tight for that. Now, while other regulatory requirements stipulate a person must hold a CPA certification to conduct verifications, for instance, performance reporting, supply data, on the other hand, must be validated by a qualified person. This approach contemplates the verifier could be an internal employee, such as the producer's controller or any other employee who holds a license or certification from the list in the next slide. Our proposed approach, it may also be reasonable for a producer to engage a third party to verify data within the report completed by an employee who doesn't hold a license or certification from the list. So another way of saying this is that if producers don't have a sort of qualified person in-house who would like to do some of the legwork, they're welcome to do so, although the person verifying that legwork and those reports would have to be a person who meets the qualifications in the following list. So why don't we jump to that slide, which is the next slide anyway. So here are examples of qualified persons. So certainly chartered professional accountants, as well as chartered accountants, certified management accountants, certified general accountants, a person licensed by the American Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, a person certified by the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, certified internal auditors, a certified professional bookkeeper regulated in Canada, or a registered professional accountant. And we're curious in terms of our consultation if we've missed any. So why don't we move on to the next slide, which is questions. And question, are there any persons who should be added or removed from the list of acceptable verifiers? Now, if we've missed any, you're welcome to add a comment, as mentioned by Michelle, or else if you'd like time to think about it, to contemplate, or to reflect, you are welcome to do so, and anything you submit to us by October 9th will be considered. Fabulous. Okay, in the absence of questions.
Ryan,
yes.
we just received a question from Tracy, and they asked, or they said, we typically use our internal auditor. Is that acceptable as a verifier? So at this stage of the consultation process, we would like that feedback from you. What we are proposing is if that person meets the qualifications within the list in the previous slide, that we would accept that person. And if that is something agreeable, we'd like to hear from you. And I'm not seeing questions pop up. Michelle, are there any other questions for us? Yep. So Chris just asked us that this may be covered later in the presentation, but they said, what is the verifier verifying? Sales data, calculations of weight / content, all of the above. So yes, a little bit ahead, but we will be getting to that. I think I saw something pop up fairly inconsistently on my screen here about lighting, and I would say that hold tight for a future consultation on lighting, because we will be reaching out to the sector and to the community as well later on, but not part of today's consultation. Great. And Ryan, we have one more question. It's regarding reporting. Mm-hmm. And they asked if the reporting we covered, supply data reporting, is different from EPRA reporting for ITTAV that they report currently in Ontario. I'm going to hand that one over to Jonathan. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I want to mention is the role for RPRA and EPRA. RPRA is a regulator, and EPRA is a pro registered with RPRA to provide a service to help obligate a producer to meet their obligation. So from the legal reporting requirement point of view, as a producer, you're required to report to the authority on the annual basis on your historical supply data. Like what Ryan mentioned before, every year you come in to report your supply data, and that will be calculated to a minimum management requirement for you to recycle in the coming years. So that's the report we're looking for, and that's your legal obligation. In terms of what you have to report to EPRA, that is a commercial contract you negotiate with EPRA, whether you report any data or any data at all, that has to be a conversation between you and EPRA, and that's not from RPRA. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Fantastic. I think it does. Well, this concludes. Oh, sorry,
Oh,
Michelle, go ahead.
We have more questions.
All right.
So, yes, we have a question from Brittany asking why we are deciding to have a verifier when other provinces have not implemented this. So what is our justification for using a verifier?
Yeah, I'll take this one.
Sure.
I think it's important to understand that there are different model of EPR, and different province, different jurisdiction have their own regulation. In Ontario, our model is individual producer responsibility, and the data, the data need to be verified, like Ryan before. Supply data need to be supplied every year to determine your coming year's obligation. The accuracy of the supply data is very important. Therefore, a verified report is required to validate the accuracy. And I just want to mention that one example is for the other regulation we RPRA oversee, which is hard regulation. The supply data actually need to be not only be verified, but also has to be audited by a third-party independent audit. So I think it's different from different province because the rules and regulations, and in Ontario, and that's what that is required under regulation. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have just a few more questions. So
Sure.
It was asked, can pros cover the auditing of data or the process? Yeah,
I think the design of the regulation, the design of the registry, we trying to is under the philosophy that who actually have that information. As a producer, you are in the business of supplying obligated material into Ontario, and a pro, they're in the business of providing a service to help you to meet your legal obligation, which is recycle, recover, and refurbish materials. So in that case, as a producer, you're in a good position, and also have the data to report your supply data. That's why we are anticipating that producer will be reporting the supply data, and not the pro.
Thank you. So we do have, there are some comments here, and we appreciate them. We will note these comments or feedback, and we also, we will review it at the end of how to submit your feedback. But for these comments that you are submitting, please also feel free to send them to us after this webinar so we can take that into consideration. There is one question left. It's not necessarily related to this consultation. So I'm going to say, Janet, we're going to follow up with you after this consultation with a response to that question, just so we can move forward with this consultation. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, with that, thank you everyone for your questions. I will pass the mic over to Jonathan. Sir, please continue.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Now I would like to introduce our proposed combined or material specific approach. So as you know, the authority is overseeing multiple materials and is responsible for creating supply and data verification audit procedure for each material. When we start this process, the authority understands that there are producers who are supplying multiple materials into Ontario, and we come up with the three options to explore the idea whether it's a good idea to combine the verification procedure among different different material. And we're seeking your feedback on whether authority should create a combined procedure for all materials or a separate procedure for each materials. And the three options we come up are: the first option will create an individual verification procedure for each materials. So one each for tire and battery and ITTAV. The second option is to have one combined verification procedure for battery and electronics, and we'll have one procedure for tire. The last option is to have one combined procedure for all material. Michelle, next slide, please. So the advantage to have 3 separate individual verification procedure for 3 material. The advantages are with an individual customized procedure, we can tailor the reporting requirements for each material group. Also with an individual verification procedure, they will be relevant procedure and tailored to each industry. One of the obvious disadvantages is that for having a 3 procedure with producer who supply multiple material into Ontario, it will increase reporting burden by following 3 separate verification procedure. Next slide, please. So the second option we're proposing is to have a combined battery and ITTAV approach and have one separate tire verification procedure. The advantage of this approach is compared to option 1, for producer who supply 3 material, it will increase reporting efficiency by following 2 procedure instead of 3. In addition, we look at currently the producer who register in each programs. Out of the 161 battery producer registered so far and 162 of ITTAV producer registered so far, we find that about 1/3, so 52 producer in the 2 programs actually supply both battery and ITTAV. One of the disadvantages of this approach is that when we combine the verification procedure for battery and electronics, some procedure may not be applicable or relevant for different industries. So for battery and ITTAV, for example, as a ITTAV producer, if you offer a warranty or repair option, you have the opportunity to reduce your supply data. But as a battery producer, that option is not there. Michelle, next slide, please. So option 3 is have a combined one verification procedure for all material. The obvious advantage of this approach is that for producer who supply multiple materials, to increase the reporting efficiencies, to just follow one procedure instead of 3. However, when we look at all the current registered procedure under 3 programs, battery, ITTAV, and tires, there are about 800 producer registered so far, and we find only 5 producer who supply all 3 material into Ontario, and that represent around 0.5% of the total population of producer. Some of the disadvantages of having one combined verification procedure for all 3 materials are first, the battery and electronic regulation are different from tire regulation. For example, if battery and electronics or ITTAV producer use post-consumer content in their product, they have opportunity to deduct them from their supply data, and that's not the case in the tire regulation. Also, the reporting requirement is different between the tire regulation and battery and electronic regulation. In the tire regulation, it specifically asks a third-party independent auditor to carry out an audit to verify the supply data, and that's not the case in the battery and electronic regulation. And have a one combined verification approach. Some of the procedure may not be applicable or relevant for a different industry. Now, Michelle, if you can turn to the next page. After authority evaluate all the advantages and disadvantages of the 3 options, we are proposing option 2. So that is a combined verification procedure only for battery and ITTAV. And for the reason already mentioned above, as the previous table summarized all the producer currently registered, we find that only 0.5% of the producer actually fall into all three categories, and it's too small to combine. And there are different reporting requirements. It will be difficult, even if we want to align the procedure, it will be very difficult because the battery and electronic regulation are different from the tire regulation. And basically some of the section of the battery and electronic regulation about management reduction is not there for the tire regulation. So with that all said, for producer who supply multiple materials into Ontario can still choose to issue one verification report, provided that the minimum reporting requirement have been met. So if you're a producer who supply battery, ITTAV and tires into Ontario, and you already hire a third-party independent audit firm to validate your tire supply, you can also ask them to verify your battery and ITTAV supply. And that's a acceptable approach. And when you supply your battery ITTAV supply data, you can submit that audit report. Or the second option is that same producer who supply all three materials can submit a one CPA audited supply report for tires and a second report for battery and ITTAV supply data verified by an internal qualified person. So this is a general overview of our approach for combined or separate approach. And I think we have some consultation questions that Michelle will ask from the participant.
So the questions we have for you, based off the slides we just reviewed, number one would be, do you support the authority's recommendation to proceed with option number 2, which is a combined batteries and ITTAV procedure and a separate procedure for tires? And then the second question is, are there additional options that the authority should consider? So while you think about that, there are 2 questions I will ask Jonathan.
Yeah.
One question from Chris is, we mentioned that only tires, ITTAV, and batteries. What about blue box and HSP? Will these be also included in a combined approach?
The blue box and HSP regulation just introduced this year, and I just want to briefly touch on the registry procedure development. We do a consultation on the supply and performance procedure consultation for each regulation. Since the battery and ITTAV regulation introduced last year, and we will do an individual consultation for each material. And for the HSP and blue box, we will do the same, do a consultation, and whether that procedure will combine together or separate, I think you will stay in tune, and we will inform you when that consultation come up.
I'd also say that as an organization, we're continuously learning as well. So although what we are doing today is proposing options and seeking your feedback, some of the learnings that we have now and over the next few months may inform future decisions as well. So it's so we look forward to your participation moving forward with the other regulations too.
We have another question from Christopher, and it's similar to the one just asked, but I'll ask it as well. Are these reporting procedures consistent with the other RPRA programs? Are there conversations on streamlining the process where verification is occurring at relevant level across all programs?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, each regulation is different. The regulation itself is different. The reporting requirement is different. What RPRA is trying to do is, as Ryan mentioned before, we want to create efficiency when we create and consult a verification procedure. We do have that in mind, how we can reduce some of the burden. That's why when you see the option here, we are doing our best when we look at the regulation itself and reporting requirement. We're aligning the battery supply verification. We're proposing to align the battery verification procedure with ITTAV supply verification procedure. We can't promise to do that for all programs, but with individual consultation with difference between each regulation, we'll do our best to keep that in mind to create efficiency when it comes to the reporting.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. We're receiving a few, not answers to the questions we asked, but more comments. So thank you to Chris and Kent who submitted their feedback. We will take both of those into consideration, and they're both very valid points. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions directly relating to what is on the screen right now? And if not, we will move forward. Okay, so we just received one question. Would this verification procedure apply to 100% audit requirement or a random selected non-compliance to this verification?
That is a fabulous question, and we will be consulting with you on that as well. And there are some slides specifically for our selection criteria. So that is to come.
Okay, great. So there aren't any more questions. So Jonathan, let's move forward.
Sure. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next section of this consultation, which is our proposed verification approach. So as Ryan mentioned earlier in his slide, that all battery and ITTAV producer is required to verify their supply data starting from next year in 2022. The authority is proposing to have all battery and ITTAV producer to submit a one-time verification report next year in 2022. So why we are proposing this approach? Because of the following two benefits: to have all battery and ITTAV producer to submit a verification report will ensure a level playing field in terms of the accuracy and the completeness of the report. So this is important because the historical supply data, which were submitted to SO and OES, they were not audited before. That's why we're proposing an initial 1-year verification. And the second benefit to have all battery ITTAV producer to verify their supply data next year is to establish a baseline for supply reporting for new materials and items that were not included in the previous waste diversion programs. For example, the definition of battery has changed to include rechargeable batteries, and the definition of what is a ITTAV now include audio and visual equipments, and also electronics, e-readers, electronics, calculator, game console. That's why we're proposing to have everybody to have a verification report next year. And like Ryan mentioned before, this verification report can be carried out by an internal qualified person, and you don't have to hire a CPA firm. Next slide, please. So after next year, 2022, the initial verification for all battery and ITTAV producer, the authority is considered for verification of supply data based on the different categories of producers. So we come up with two options. The first option is to have a 3 producer category: a large producer category, a medium producer category, a small producer categories, and a large producer category producer have to undergo a comprehensive verification procedure, and medium producer, the qualified person will take on a simplified procedure, and a small producer will not require to submit a verification report, but our PRA will carry out our own inspection. The second option is to have a two-producer category. A large producer category will be required to submit a verification report carried out by an internal qualified person. The rest of a producer will be subject to the inspection. So next year, after we get our baseline verification supply data, our PRA will probably going to host another consultation section to get your feedback on where we should draw the line for a large producer and where we should draw the line for a small producer. And that's going to happen next year. So I think this covers the overall general approach for our verification approach. And I will now turn to Michelle for some of the questions we have for you.
Okay, so we're looking for some feedback on, do you support the authority's proposal that all batteries and ITTAV producers submit a one-time supply data verification report in 2022? Also, which option to separate producers into different categories do you prefer? As well as what should the authority consider when determining what the verification process will be for different categories of producers? So we have a question relating to these, and it's from Colin, and he's asking, how do we define a medium producer, as it's not defined in the battery regulation currently?
Yeah, that's what I just said. We're gonna host another consultation next year when we get a baseline supply data from all the registered producers, and we will consult with you where we should draw the line for the large and where we should draw the line for small, and whoever in the between will be defined as medium producer. And we will consult that next year.
We have another question asking, what does an inspection consist of?
Okay, it will be probably in the format of a questionnaire. It will be a list of questions that we will send to a producer. The inspector probably going to spend half an hour and sit with you to go over all the questions on that questionnaire and decide if is there a need, any red flag, if there's a need for a comprehensive inspection, or there's no compliance issue. So it's going to be in the format of a questionnaire.
And depending on where we land on these procedures, our compliance verification process internally may vary, even on the inspection side. So something to keep in mind is that the inspection process intends to verify compliance with legislation, with procedures. So the inspection would not be a fishing trip or outlandish. It would be to determine whether or not an entity is compliant.
Great, thank you. We have another question asking if an exempt producer under Section 7 of the battery regulation, do they need to verify?
Yeah. So I want to clarify this. So under the battery regulation, there are different exemptions. If you're a producer, a rechargeable battery producer, and if your management requirement is below 1.5 tons, and if you are a single-use battery producer, if your minimum management requirement below 2.5 tons, you will be qualified for exemptions. And further in the regulation, it says if you have less than 5 full-time employees, you're exempt from all the requirements. In that case, you will not be required to register and report. Therefore, obviously, you're not be subject to any of this verification procedure. If another scenario, if you meet the exemption I just mentioned, but you have more than 5 full-time employees, then you're required to register and report. And in that case, you will be subject to this verification requirement. And when you report next year in 2022, along with your supply data, you'll be required to submit a verification report with your supply data. Hope that clarified that question.
So we have a question here that does not relate to these 3 questions, but I think is important for us to explain. Sean is saying how other programs outside of Ontario, pros audit their own members. So the question is, why aren't pros for our program, why aren't pros auditing their members? And then our PRA then audit the pros.
Yeah, I think the reason, some of the reasons are it's the supply data that producer provide to us. We'll treat them as market sensitive information, and it depends on the individual company's risk level, whether you want to supply your market sensitive supply information to your pro, or the pro gonna audit that report. That's that may not be a good idea. And another reason, as I mentioned it before, pro they are not in the business of supply new product, obligate product into Ontario, and they don't have that information, and they shouldn't be the one who submit or audit that information. And lastly, I want to mention Ontario is a province which adapt the individual producer responsibility. So what that means is, as a producer, you are individually obligated for the all the product you supply into Ontario, and you're individually obligated to have them recycled and refurbished, reused at the end of useful life. So it's your legal obligation, and as a regulator, we have to make sure that the data supply is accurate, and you're individually responsible for that. That's why a pro cannot audit that information, and it needs to be that information need to submit to us and verify by yourself.
Now, regulatory requirements do vary province to province, jurisdiction by jurisdiction outside of Canada. And as Jonathan was saying, we have a particular model in Ontario. Now, if a pro were to, or if, pardon me, a producer were to request a pro undertake an audit on their behalf, nothing in what we're proposing today would preclude that. However, it would not be a substitute for the verifications that we're proposing today.
Thank you. So we have one final question here.
Sure.
Sorry, we now have 2 questions. So the first one being in 2022, sorry, will there be procedures for the 2022 supply data verification, or will the process be up to the producer?
So, yeah, like what Ryan covered in his slide in the beginning, there is a timeline. We're doing 2 consultations on the proposed verification procedure. This first section, we're gonna talk about the overall overarching objective and proposed approach. And around November, we're gonna publish what is the proposed procedure, and you will have opportunity to take a look. And what's the second part, Michelle? Sorry, I missed the second part of the question. Is the producer up to the producer?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. It won't up to the producer. Our PR will provide guidance to have a consistent report across the board.
Okay, thank you. And then Andrea is just asking for some clarification. So a CPA/accountant type that we listed on our verifiers that is employed or contracted by a pro, can they or can they not provide verification services?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we will get back to you. For now, what we're proposing is that qualified person have to have one of the designations, and it can be the same person who prepare or collect that data. It has to be a different person to avoid a self-review risk. But whether that CPA or accountant has a contract with a pro, and if that has anything to do with this, I think we'll take that and discuss internally and get back to you.
Yeah, Andrew, I do appreciate the question. And at this phase of consultation process, it is something for us to think about. I'd say that what we have just proposed that would not fit into our model since we would be expecting producers to undertake verifications, but it's a consultation, so you're welcome. So we have this feedback now. If you'd like to provide additional insight before October 9th or suggest a different approach, we're also happy to hear that.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question that I know the answer to, but I'll probably let Jonathan respond to. So would verification reporting be replacing registry fees reporting?
I think that's if I understand this question correctly, and I'm going to answer the way I understand it. Registry fee reporting it's not a reporting. When you submit your supply data, and based on the kilograms you supplied, there will be a registry fee attached to it. And RPRA doing a registry consultation each year to consult with all the program participants to understand, to set the fees. So that's a different process than what we're discussing today. We're talking about the supply data, the unit and kilograms. You enter into the registry portal, what you need to do to make sure that the data is accurate and verified. So I think that's a two different process, and I hope that clarify this question.
Great, so that's all the questions we have so far. So let's move on.
Yeah, so the last section of this consultation is about sampling methodology. So sampling is a tool widely adopted in verification to obtain confidence without testing 100% of the population. The authority is proposing to use a statistical sampling methodology, which involves a random selection of sample items and use a probability theory to evaluate the sample result. So before I go into the consideration why a producer may choose one sample size versus another, I would like to turn to the next page to give everyone a look of what the sample size will look like under each confidence level. So as you can see from this chart, confidence level, 99, 95, and 90%, along with other variables, will determine the sample size need to be selected for testing. And you can see 99% of the confidence level is the highest confidence level, and it will require the most of the sample size to be tested. And when you see from the sample size, when the sample size drops, so as this, as you can see, as the confidence level dropped, so it's a sample size. And what this all means is that the more sample you selected for testing, the more confidence you will have in the population you did not test. So what this all mean when a registry verification procedure created, how the qualified person gonna use this methodology. I want to give you one example. For example, when a producer report their supply data and deduct any obligated weight because they are sold or shipped to other province, a typical verification procedure will ask that qualified person to select sample to verify that the product actually went out of province. So in that scenario, if you look at in a calendar year, that producer sold 100, there are 100 invoices or transaction made up that out of province. So in that case, that 100 invoice will be the population to be selected for testing. And if we decide on 90% of confidence level, then 51 transaction or invoices need to be validated to verify that those products actually went out of a province of Ontario, and they should not be reported when producers submit that report. So have a brief understanding of how the sampling methodology going to work. I want to go back to the previous slide to talk about some of the consideration why a producer would want to consider one sample size versus another. For sure, a lower confidence level or a small sample size will reduce the level of effort to require the verify of the supply data. However, a producer may want to consider a large sample size and a higher confidence level because it will increase the likelihood of catching reporting errors and reduce the risk of non-compliance if one day RPRA decides to do an inspection on your supply data. I think that's wrapped up the section of my discussion of the sampling methodology, and I'm going to turn it to Michelle to go over some of the consultation questions we want to ask.
Thank you, Jonathan. So the questions we're looking for feedback on are, do you support the authority using a sampling methodology in the supply data verification procedure? As well as what level of confidence you think is acceptable to ensure the accuracy of the supply data? So we currently don't have any questions, but we'll just give it a moment. Okay, we'll move on. Oh, we have one question. So Jonathan, what do we mean by sampling? Do we expect the producer to show us the invoices?
Yeah. So like what Michelle said here on this page, we're looking for your feedback on which confidence level should be decided when it comes to sampling. There are 3 different confidence levels, and that will determine what are the sample size need to be verified. And we will not expect a producer to show us the invoice. Instead, this whole process, the validation process, can be carried out by an internal qualified person. So like the same example Ryan talked about earlier in his slide, if a CFO has a destination from one of the destination from the list, that person can carry out a validation of that data if we decide a 90% or 95% confidence level when he or she look at the total population of, for example, the same example I give before, there are 100 invoice makeup of all the out of province sale, that your CFO can take a sample from that population and validate that, yeah, for all those obligated product actually went out of province, and we're going to subtract that from our supply data. And at the end, your internal qualified person, the CFO, will give a verified report. I've used RPRA's proposed verification procedure. I follow the methodology, and the data looks reasonable and accurate. Hopefully that answered the question.
We have a similar question, just asking for us to confirm, when we're talking about sampling, are we referring to taking a sampling of producers or a sampling of records of a producer?
we're talking about a sampling of transactions, not a list of producers. So, you know, the population will be the transactions, and the sampling going to based on how big are the transactions incurred in a year, and the sampling methodology going to select based on that population, a percentage of what need to be verified.
It might be, so perhaps a different way of saying this is that 100% of producers will be undertaking verification, other than those who are other than those who have exemptions that Jonathan mentioned. And for all of the producers who are undertaking verifications, that the sample size, so these sample sizes would be with regard to the number of transactions they would essentially be verifying comply with the requirements in the regulations.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Ryan. I think I misunderstood the question. Yeah.
No. We did know that we had a risk of turning this into a stats class, and we want to make sure that the concepts are at least clear for today, so that everyone in the audience can really have a chance to think and reflect and provide us some feedback.
We have another question here. Reporting will be coming from their ERP system. Is this considered a 100% sampling?
Yeah, I think as an auditor myself, I audited different entities, and I understand where you're coming from. The raw data coming from your ERP system is 100% of the population, but that's not a population may need to be verified. I give one example of the out of province sale, but for this example, for example, as a producer from your ERP system, there are in a calendar year, there are 1,000 transactions occurred in a calendar year, and from that 1,000 transaction or invoices, I calculate to be a 10,000 of obligated unit you need to report. But when you look at that raw data and 10,000 of unit, you look at the definition of what's a battery or ITTAV, you decide, okay, 20,000 of them are not meet the definition, so I'm not going to report. And another 20,000, they actually went out of province, they will not be subject to reporting. So the population in this case will be whatever you didn't report. So compared to the raw data and whatever you submit to RPRA, the difference of you didn't report, that will become the population. So a different person who collect that data, a qualified person will use the difference as a population and select the sample to validate, to trace to the shipping documents to see, those batteries are actually went to Quebec. So it is correct. We should subtract that from our supply data. Or a qualified person look at the variances and to validate, that invoice consists of items that's not a battery or ITTV, and that is correct. We should subtract that from our supply data. So I think the meaning of population is different from what you extract from your ERP system and what we mean when the qualified person need to validate. I hope that clarified the question.
So we have a few questions here and some comments. I will mention this one. So is the following open for consideration? That RPRA adopts the sampling methodology to select the producers to be audited instead to imposing it to all the registered companies.
Yeah, I would say that we're open to that. I would say to use caution when recommending that, though, because there would be a certain amount of risk adopted by entities who do not participate in verification, because the verification procedure lets producers know how much material they need to manage for the year ahead. So if there is a consistent shortfall, it means that there are risks of falling out of compliance in that case. But so that's the long answer, but the short answer is Jonathan's answer is yes. It is something valid for us to consider. Yes.
We have a few other questions. So one being, are producers to verify what they did not report? Example, deductions or the net supply data reported?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So we haven't posted the proposed procedure, but my experience from other verification procedure we drafted, a testing of the calculation of how you arrive your supply data is a key. So anything you subtract from your total supply, whether it's because they are they're not supplied into Ontario or they did not meet the definition of a battery or ITTAV, that need to be validated to make sure that your calculation is accurate when you submit that data to RPRA. So the answer is yes. So we're going to validate your methodology and the deduction you made to when you submit that report.
Great. Our next question is the sampling by number of transactions or by number of units?
Yeah, it will be based on the number of transactions, typically a invoice. So on one invoice, you could sold 10,000 units. We're not going to ask you to select from the units, but from a transaction.
Great. And we have one more question. Would RPRA be considering sampling methodology to ensure compliance to the Ontario regulation, selecting enough producers for verification rather than 100% verification process, providing the confidence level on our current reporting procedure, as auditing / verification is costly to a business?
Yeah, I think I already covered in my previous slide. This 100% of verification will only be for next year, 1 year in 2022. We're proposing, and it will help us to get an idea of the baseline supporting data to understand the total supply data, to make sure it's accurate based on the new regulation. And in the future year, in 2023 and on, RPRA did consider the option to separate producer into different categories, large, medium, small, or large, small. So after next year, we're proposing a category approach. So only probably the large and medium need to verify, and the small producer will be subject to inspection.
Great, so that's all the questions we have for now. So we'll move forward. So before we move forward and cover next steps, we will be launching a very quick poll to gather your feedback on today's webinar. This will take you 30 seconds to fill out. And the reason we launch this poll is for us to get a good understanding of how helpful this webinar was, as well as highlight any ways we can enhance our approach to future webinars. So I will launch the poll now. And again, I'll leave it up for 30 to 45 seconds, and we appreciate your participation. Great. Thank you so much, everyone who participated in that. So we will review the next steps on how we're moving forward. So you may provide your feedback on the proposed principles and methodologies that we will be using to update the supply data verification section in the registry procedures by emailing your comments to consultations@rpra.ca. I will note that all comments that were sent during this webinar will also be taken into consideration. But if you want to provide a more detailed feedback, please do so by submitting to consultations@rpra.ca. To review these slides, as well as this recording, you can go to the webpage that is listed here. These slides will also be available this afternoon, as well as the recording. And we are looking for your feedback by October 9th, so 1 month from today. And then the draft procedure will be posted the week of November 15th for your review. And then we will also be hosting another webinar to actually review that draft procedure, and that will be late November. And we will send out a communication to producers closer to that date, so stay tuned for that. And on that note, we would like to thank you all for joining us today and for your feedback that you've submitted today, as well as the feedback you may submit by October 9th. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we can stay on the line for a few more minutes and would be happy to answer them. And if not, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks very much, everyone.
We do have one question. I'm not sure if Artie is still on the line, but let's go ahead and answer their question anyways. Would RPRA start with the sampling methodology, and if the verification/auditing came back to have high non-conformity, would then be a 100% verification to all producer to be carried out?
It's a good question. Sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. Yes, it's a good question. So what I would say is that our internal compliance processes would flow from the decisions that we make about the data verification process that we're deciding now. Reflexively, I would say that if there's a high degree of non-conformance, that this would likely be a trigger for inspection or another intervention from the regulator. That could be something like providing assistance in understanding regulations, helping producers understand perhaps where they can do better next time, and our usual approach of communicating for compliance.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We don't have any more questions, so we look forward to receiving your feedback via email.
Fabulous. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.